guy's name on second base?
Who's playing second?
Who's playing first?
I don't know.
You have no doubt noticed from the banners, from a conversation we had at the beginning of the service, our theme around here at Calvary as we enter into this new sort of programmatic year is better connected. And here at Calvary, we want to get better connected because we believe God created us in such a way that when we are connected to others who are also curious about this God of ours, we believe life is better. And last week we sort of kicked off this 4-week worship series by going way back to the story that starts the whole story of our faith, the story of creation. And we heard how at the end of each day of creation, God looked at all God had created, and God saw that it was, help me if you remember, it was good, right? And then on the last day of creation, God stepped back and saw everything that God had created, everything. And God saw that it was not just good, it was very good. It was very good. But as we read on in the story, it says that not that long after, for God, everything went from very, very good to not good. Things went from very good to not good because God realized that something was wrong. We might even say that God realized God maybe even made a mistake that God needed to correct. Because when he looked at Adam, who was all alone, God said, this is not good. Why? Because Adam was alone. Adam was all alone, and because of this, for God, things were all wrong. Well, God knows what you and I know, that we need others around us, and we need those people around us who will remind us who we really are. Way back when, life was not good for Adam when he was alone, and we too know, don't we? Nod your head just to appease me. We know that when we are alone, things are not good, right? It's not good. And so God created someone for Adam who would remind Adam day in and day out of who he really was, that he was a child of God, that he was worthy, that he was very good in God's eyes. Way back, the very first story of the Bible, the story of creation, there we hear it. We were not meant as people to be alone. That's how God created us. And folks, we're going to find out that this is a theme that happens again. We hear about it again and again and again. And we're going to hear about it again this week. That when we are alone, it's just not good. It's not how God intended creation. All right. I want to talk to the guys for just a minute. Guys who are married. How many of you have had this experience? There's a home improvement project to be done around your home. And your wife looks at you and just maybe says something like this. Honey, maybe we should call a professional to take care of this one. Guys, tell me I'm not the only one who's ever, thank you, Lowell, right? Lowell's the only guy who's honest. Oh, we got another one over here, right? Wives, maybe you don't know this, but when you tell your husbands this, we are all the more resistant to pick up the phone and call someone. You know this, right? I'm not going to call someone. I can do this myself, right? Guys, right? I can do it myself. Now, I suppose, if we are honest, guys, I suppose our wives have good reason for their opinions about wanting us to call someone to help, like my wife. Let me give you a few examples. We cut down a tree in our front yard, and we had to have a stump ground out. Do we hire someone to come and do this? Guys, do we hire someone? No way. Let's hear it. 1, 2, 3. No way. I told my wife, I can do this by myself, right? And so I went to Geyer, I rented a stump grinder, I picked that thing up, I put it in place, I lit that baby up, and wouldn't you know it, not 2 minutes later, the grinder kicked out a rock from the ground, it shot across our front yard and shattered my wife's window in her car. True story. Maybe there's a reason my wife says, you shouldn't do this alone. Or it's like when we bought our boat. We're fortunate enough to buy a boat a few years back, and I'd never owned a boat. It came time to winterize that boat. Guys, do we call someone to have them winterize their boat? No way, right? I can do this myself. Sure enough, I stripped out both the plugs in the lower unit, and it ended up costing me 5 times as much to winterize my boat. Or we were planting shrubs at our house. A simple thing. This is going to be easy. Of course, I'm going to do it myself. All I had to do was dig a hole, drop the thing in it. Well, I shoved the spade into the ground, and the second shove of that spade, I went right through our irrigation system. How about that? Because I could do it all by myself. Now, I don't know why my wife constantly suggests that I shouldn't do these projects alone, right? Well, folks, in the story we're going to read today, Moses is feeling much the same way. You see, God's people, they'd been held in captivity in Egypt, and life was just miserable in Egypt. Day after day after day, they were forced to make bricks out in the hot sun for years and years and years on end. But God heard God's people's cries, and he raised up this leader in Moses. And a day came when Moses said to Pharaoh, let my people what? Go, right? Picture Charlton Heston, right? And lo and behold, Moses led God's people out through the Red Sea, out into the wilderness toward a land that God had promised for them. And so today, we're going to catch up with Moses and God's people, and they're traveling through the wilderness. Now, you've all been on a road trip before, right? And maybe you've been on a road trip with your family. How do things normally go on a family road trip? Well, you leave home about 2 miles down the road. I know which son of mine would say, I've got to go to the bathroom, right? Or I turn to my wife and say, did we lock the front door? I can't remember. Or someone says, I'm hungry, or I need a snack, or I want a different snack. I'm thirsty. My tummy hurts. I start to notice that the car is making a funny noise. My wife says, I think we missed a turn back there, right? This is how road trips go. Things never go as planned. Now, imagine Moses here. He's leading this massive road trip through the desert. And as you can imagine, it's not long before there are issues, and the people start to complain. It's hot out here. I'm thirsty. I'm hungry. I don't like the food you gave us. I want something else. Just like those good old family road trips, those traveling with Moses, they start to grumble, right? They start to complain. They start to bellyache. And get this, the Bible says this gathering of folks that are traveling through the wilderness, all the Israelites, it's not a small group. The Bible says that there are 600,000 Israelite men, along with their children and their families, who left Egypt for the promised land and are following Moses on this big old road trip. In total, there may have been, some scholars say, 2.4 million Israelites who are following Moses through the desert. That's the population of Chicago, folks. Now imagine being Moses. You've been traveling through the wilderness for a few weeks, and everyone realizes this is going to be this is not just an overnight trip. This is going to be a long trek. And that's when the complaining and the whining and the belly aching, they all start. And I imagine Moses said to himself, people, get off my back. Quit your belly aching. Might I remind you that I'm the one who pulled you out of slavery, right? Give me a little slack here. And so bear with me here. Given the massive number of people who are traveling through the wilderness with him, they needed some order, right? as they moved through this wilderness, Moses made himself, on occasion, available to all the people so that they could sort of air their concerns as they traveled, their conflicts, their complaints. And so he would himself hear their concerns. The Bible says that he would judge over their various concerns, all right? And so we meet up today with Moses after one of these long, day-long sessions of him hearing their complaints, where Moses is judging over the people. He's trying to handle their issues, all their disputes, to appease them of all their concerns. And after one of these marathon days, we hear how Moses' father-in-law wants to have a little talk with him. When you hear father-in-law, you should go, dun, 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 right? You guys know what I'm talking about. So whenever your father-in-law wants to have a little talk with you, it's just not good. It's not good. And that was the same in the Bible. It's as if Moses' father-in-law said to him, Moses, let's step out into the garage for a little bit, right? Well, here's what we read today. We're going to put it up on the screen. The next day, Moses sat as judge for the people, right? And while the people stood around him from morning until evening, when Moses' father-in-law saw all that he was doing for all the people, he said, "What is this that you are doing for the people?" Join me here. "Why do you sit alone while all these people stand around you from morning until evening?" And what's going to follow is that Moses is going to kind of stutter. He's going to kind of say, I'm just doing what needs to be done. If I don't do it, who's going to do it? Who's going to take care of the people? And by the way, I can handle this, father-in-law. I don't need any help. I'm going to be okay. I can do this all on my own. Well, the father-in-law Moses says a couple of things to his father-in-law, and his father-in-law asks, why? Well, we heard it. Why do you try and do this alone? And that's when Moses, we read here, said to his father-in-law, well, this is why I do it alone, because the people come to me to inquire of God. When they have a dispute, they come to me, and I decide between one person and another, and I make known to them the statutes and the instructions of God. Well, Moses' father-in-law said to him, what you are doing is what? It's not good. Does that sound familiar? It's the same thing God said in the creation story that we read last week when he saw Adam was all alone. This is not good. And now Moses' father-in-law is saying the same. And by the way, when your father-in-law says something's not good, it's just not good. His father-in-law goes on and says this, "You will surely wear yourself out, both you and these people with you, for the task is too heavy for you. You cannot do it alone." Now listen to me. I will give you counsel, and God be with you. You should represent the people before God, and you should bring their cases before God. Teach them the statutes and the instructions, and make known to them the way they are to go and the things they are to do. You should also look for able men among all the people, men who fear God, are trustworthy, and hate dishonest gain. Set such men over them as officers, over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. Let them sit as judges for the people at all times. Let them bring every important case to you, but decide every minor case themselves. So it will be easier for you, and they will bear the burden with you. And if you do this, and God so commands you, then you will be able to endure, and all these people will go to their home in peace. His father-in-law says, Moses, you got to get better connected. You can't do this alone. You just can't. It's not working. It never did. It never will. Moses, you've got to get connected, because going it alone is not how God created us. I'm not going to have you raise your hand, but we've all been there, right? We've all been Moses, right? We've had our Moses moments. We all We all have this side of us that from time to time says, I'm going to do life all on my own. I can do it by myself, thank you very much. I'm not going to ask for directions. I'm not going to ask for help. I don't need that doctor. No way that we're going to go see that counselor. If we can't figure this out on our own, what's the point? I'm not going to that gathering. They all know what I did. We don't have time to get together with those friends or family. We're just too busy. And when we do this, it's sort of like we're saying, I'm just fine doing life on my own, thank you very much. And yet we all know that what Moses' father-in-law said is true. Doing life alone is not good. And I think we all know this to be true. I guess one could say it's not rocket science. I don't think I'm telling you anything new tonight. But just maybe, here's something new. Hear this. Well, while we all know that doing life alone is not good, I want to talk about faith for a second. Because I believe that doing faith, trying to do this thing called faith, doing faith alone is impossible. Let me say this again. While we all know that doing life alone is not good, doing faith alone is impossible. It's impossible. And folks, I know this is true. I've had so many folks in my office who have said things like this. Pastor, last year I decided I really wanted to get serious about my faith life. And then they shared that maybe they purchased a devotion book or they started listening to some Christian podcast or they started to read their Bible. And they always share with me how this went really well for the first few days or even the first few weeks. They tell me, I read through Genesis, I read through Exodus, it was a breeze, Pastor. But inevitably, a few weeks into it, life got busy. Kids had a tournament. I had some big deadline at work. I read the Bible. I read Genesis, Exodus. I got to Leviticus. And Pastor, that's a weird book. Huh? That's a weird book. And inevitably, they share how they fell off the wagon. It was just too hard to do it on their own. Or maybe you grew up in the church. And your parents religiously put you through Sunday school and confirmation classes, insistent that you needed to get confirmed, that this is what made you a good Christian, that faith was kind of like a class in school, like math or history or English. Confirmation classes, or if you were Catholic, CCD, that's where you'll get the answers. And your confirmation day then was sort of like a graduation that certified that you had all the answers. You were done, you had passed, and you could move on now. But then real life happened. You went off to school or your first job, you had kids, you got married, you lost a loved one, you went through a hardship, and all that you learned in confirmation or CCD seemed irrelevant. Why? Because while doing life alone is not good, doing faith alone is impossible. And why do I say this? Because faith is caught. It's not something you can teach. Faith is caught. It's not taught. It's caught. It's not taught. How many of you know a teacher pretty well? Raise your hand if you know a teacher, right? As we start the school year, of course, we should be really thankful for those teachers, right? We should be thankful. But if you know any teachers, you know that it's almost impossible for a teacher to make it through the fall and the winter without getting sick, right? You know this, right? Because their classrooms become sort of like a petri dish with all those germs and those bugs and all those kids carry through. And being around all those germ-carrying youngsters, you're inevitably going to catch something, right? Or it's like a guy I met who instilled in me a love for baseball. Has anyone heard of the baseball player Dave Engel? Anyone name him? He was sort of a one-hit wonder for the Minnesota Twins. He played back in the 80s. He was a catcher. And I was so lucky as a little kid, about my son's age, to get his autograph on a baseball before a game. Everybody say, ooh, right. I had no idea who he was. But from that point on, I wanted to be a catcher. Folks, we catch faith. We don't learn faith. We catch faith from the people around us who are faithful. Because I know you're going to forget this. Here we go. Faith is what? Caught. It's not taught. Good catch, by the way. Here we go. Faith is what? Caught. It's not taught. You see, there's a direct correlation between the depth and the breadth of someone's faith and how much time you spend connected to others of faith. Faith is sort of this catchy thing. For example, I tell parents this all the time. If faith is important to you as parents, or if it isn't important to you as parents, or church is simply something that you do because grandma told you to do, surprise, surprise, it will never be important to your kids. You want to grow a deeper faith? Spend time with others who want the same, because faith is, John, I'll warn you, it's what? Caught. It's not taught. Well done.